Now we will be connecting and finishing the armhole facings of our garment. Okay, to determine which is the front armhole and the back armhole, there are many signs. First, the front armhole is more curved and shorter than the back armhole. Now, we also have to make sure that this is the shoulder line and this is the side seam. Usually, we mark this. See, this is the shoulder line. And here, surely we have also marked the shoulder line. So this is the side seams of the back facing. And this is the side seams of the front facing. So now, we will be connecting the front and back armhole facings together. Again, you will see that we are pinning from the wrong side of the fabric. And we are pinning the ends first of the shoulder line and the ends of the sewing line of the side seam. We will also do the same procedure for the other armhole facing. Now we start sewing the shoulder lines together. Of course, we have to lock stitch the ends of the facings. Now we're sewing together the side seams. Now we have to flatten the side seam allowances and the shoulder line allowances. Again, if there's an excess fabric on the seam allowances, we just have to cut this off. This happens because of the curve of the armhole. So now, this is the outer edge of the armhole facing, which we will be finishing. This area, the armhole curve, is the part which we will be connecting to the main bodies. This part of the sewing machine has a purpose. You can actually remove it when you're sewing something with a round curve. Okay, we're just using the same procedure as we have done to finish the other edges of our garment pieces. Of course, since this piece of the garment is curved, we're finishing this more slowly. Okay, we have completed the finishing of the armhole facings. Now we're ready to connect the armhole facing on the main garment. First, we will flatten the sewing allowances on the shoulder line. We will also flatten the sewing allowances on the other shoulder line. Then, we will flatten the sewing allowances of the side seam. We do this by pinning the sewing allowance on the main garment. We are also pinning and flattening the sewing allowances on the other side of the garment. After this, we will turn the main garment on its right side. So this is the armhole facing. First, to determine where the shoulder line is, look for the mark. As we have marked this, as you can see, it says SH for shoulder. So now we know that this is the shoulder line. Another clue would be, you fold the shoulder line. The longer part of the armhole facing is the back armhole facing. And of course, the front armhole facing is more curved and shorter. So, since this has been laid flat due to the finishing of the facing, we can actually pin this on the shoulder line of the main bodice, making sure that since this is the back part of the main bodice, this is also the back part of your armhole facing. So we start pinning the armhole facing to the main bodice. First, we pin the shoulder lines of both the main bodice and the armhole facing. And then we also pin the side seam lines of the main bodice and the armhole facing. We pin on the main body side. As you can see, we are pinning on the wrong side of both parts of the main garment and the facing. And we are following the sewing marks or sewing lines of both the main garment and the facing. And we are pinning the sewing lines of both the main garment and the armhole facing. Now that we have completely pinned the main garment to the armhole facing, we can start sewing this together. We start with the side seam. We lay this flat on the presser foot and we follow the sewing lines. We don't need to lock stitch this because we will just run the stitch over the start of our stitching. Okay, when we are sewing this together, we have to be careful. We have to make sure that the underside is flat also. Otherwise, this area of your main bodice may be folded, and when you start fitting the dress, you'll have a problem because then there are folds here, which means you have to rip and resew everything again. So be careful. Make sure that the underside is flat. You have to turn because this is a curve and round. We have to make sure that we sew this segment by segment and that we are turning the fabric. When we get to the side seam part, this is the time we can lock stitch our stitches. Here, now that we're in the side seam area, we have lock stitched the stitches. Okay, we have completed the connection of the armhole facing to the main bodice. Before we cut the allowances, it is best to check if everything is sewn properly. This way, like there's a fold here. So as you can see, has been perfectly sewn together. Okay, now we can cut the excess sewing allowances, leaving 1/4 of an inch or 0.6 of a centimeter. Okay, now we can start slashing the sewing allowances, being mindful that where there is a thick part of the fabric, the slashes should be nearer each other. we slash the sewing allowance so that when we turn over the facing, it will follow the shape of the curve of the armhole. That's also the same reason why we slash the neckline curve or the neckline. As you can see, this is the sewing allowance. Now, we will lay our armhole facing this way, and it should be sewn on the armhole facing so that it will flatten the facing. Just make sure that you are sewing on the sewing allowance, which is under the facing. We're doing a top stitch on the facing so that this will flatten or sew together the sewing allowance to the facing. At the end, we can actually lock stitch. To attach the other armhole facing on the main bodice, we will just follow the same procedure that we did on this side of our armhole. Now that we have connected the armhole facings on both sides of the garment, we will be pin basting this. Again, we start pin basting on the shoulder seam and the side seam. Then we pin baste the inner part of the facing. After which, we will be hand basting this the way we hand basted the neckline facing. We will not be showing this anymore to save time. As you can see, we have completely hand basted the facing of the neckline and the armholes.